Hey everyone, so in this video I'll be going through a really exciting and crazy tactical game that I played on the black side of the Advanced French. It was a 3-minute blitz game played on chess.com. Started off fairly slowly in what seems to be a pretty normal and stable position, but it gets absolutely crazy, so please do stick around to the end as the tactics and possibilities in this game just go absolutely insane. Okay, let's dive into it. Okay, so we have the black pieces against Verreura. We have a Sicilian defense. We'll go for the open. Okay, he goes for c3 Sicilian. And we transpose into an advanced French. This is something that can easily happen when you play the Sicilian. In some situations you can transpose into a advanced French, so knowing the French defense as a Sicilian player can become quite useful actually. So he goes for an unusual setup. Let's see what we go here. We've got pressure on the center, but he is protecting that twice. So I'm going to play a move here, knight a7, which is a maneuver that I learned from Alexei Shirov's games actually. So his idea is he's vacating the b5 square for his bishop, as this bishop here is usually a very bad piece in the French structures as black, so we take any opportunity that we can to exchange that piece off. We retake with the queen, avoiding having a awkward backward pawn on c6. We need to keep c8 on the control. Let's see, I think we can simply develop. It is a bit of a double-edged position here. He is coming into c5, which is a gaping hole in the black camp. He can consider pushing on the king side as well. This knight on f5 is one of black's great assets at the moment. So we need to drop back here, attacking g4, he will defend, and we still do have prospects for the knight as well. It's not all doom and gloom here. We can play eventual f6 and break up that structure. What happens after this? Okay. Retake. So there's no question about it that white is considerably better in this situation, hitting the knight on h6, so we just simply bring it back. Some ideas of jumping in, actually. Which knight, though, is the question. I'd probably potentially bring this one back, as this guy is playing some important defensive duties. So let's bring this guy back into the game. Okay. This might seem counterintuitive, but I am going to step onto c8, which is lined up with the enemy rook. But my idea was that I was going to block that. Okay. Lining up the rook against the queen. It's not all doom and gloom here. I think that in a practical sense, black does have some chances here. Lots of pressure here. We might be able to regain that pawn. Attacking here. Let's see. If we retake this guy, what happens? Okay, what is happening here? We might simply need to protect our knight. Very unclear and difficult position, actually. A lot of things happening here. Let's go here. Threatening to win his queen. Let's see if he spots that threat. He can probably just step out of that check, honestly, and play a waiting move. There is a lot of pressure in the position here. I think that just picks up the queen. Good game. Okay, so let's do a quick game review and see which opportunities were missed by both sides. So we have an accuracy on my behalf of 86.6, which I'm quite happy about. and my opponent had an accuracy of 77.5. So let's go to some of the critical points in the game. This was the last book move, apparently. Let's go to the next key move. Apparently rook c8 was a mistake on my behalf. Looks like a very natural move. What is the suggestion? Okay, apparently knight e7 immediately was a better move. The actual eval isn't too different, to be honest. Knight g7, given 0.5 advantage, whereas rook c8, 0.1, I think in a blitz game, not that big of a deal. b4 is a miss. This overlooks an opportunity to develop a knight off its starting square. So apparently better than b4 immediately was for my opponent to simply develop. I go with a6, which is the best move. And once again, this idea, as mentioned in the game, is something that I picked up from watching Alexei Shirov's games. The idea is that we bring our knight back here to a7, and we vacate this square for the bishop and look to exchange it off. So in these French structures where the pawns in the center are locked up, Black's light squared bishop is a very terrible piece as it's stuck within its own pawn chain, and the best that you can really hope for with this piece as Black is to simply exchange it off. And this idea of pushing a6, vacating that square for the knight, and opening this route here for the bishop, it's a pretty creative solution, and it's one of my go-to strategies in the advanced French as Black. Okay, so let's move forward. Okay, so knight f5 apparently was not a great move on my behalf. It looks incredibly strong to me. I'm not sure what is wrong here. Let's see what is best. Oh, right. Okay, so what happens here? We are hitting the bishop, which is loose. Let's see what happens. Apparently he has to defend that bishop. We get into f5. Okay, interesting variation. So something to take a mental note of for next time, that when given the opportunity in the advanced French, we just infiltrate as soon as possible. We missed that opportunity to infiltrate with our queen, instead played the immediate knight f5, which I think very normal and natural human move to make. He takes control of the open file. So we drop back to d7 with our queen. I thought that this was the only move really to consider, as we need to keep c8 on the wraps. It was given as an inaccuracy, which is very surprising. So apparently queen b6 was even stronger. Lots of pressure here on d4, and just simply allowing this check to come through. The idea is that we simply step out of the check. The rook is being pressured, and there's no way for white to maintain his rook here, so he has to simply drop back. So that idea of simply allowing the check and just stepping out of it is given an exclamation mark by the engine and by game review. And yeah, rightly so, it didn't even cross my mind during the game that we can simply allow that check to come through. Obviously in the French defense, the queen usually belongs on one of these dark squares, either b6 or c7, depending on the situation. On b6, it is a very natural square in the French for the queen, as you are pressuring d4. So yeah, another one to take a mental note of, that sometimes simply allowing that infiltration from white is not the end of the world if you can't maintain that piece there. Very interesting. Okay, so I drop back to d7 instead. Let's go forward to see the next interesting point in the game. Queen c2 apparently is a mistake, and I've played f6 here, which has given white a pretty big edge here. During the game, I thought that f6 was a fairly thematic strike that you commonly see in these French structures. So what was so incredibly horrible about f6? He takes on f6, I take back with the pawn, looking to maintain control of these important dark squares with a pawn. And he plays queen to d2, which is a mistake. I thought that was quite natural, trying to play some pressure and see if he can get something going there on the dark squares, but what was best in that situation was jumping immediately in with his knight. So in this position here, the best continuation was to jump in immediately with his knight. Pressure here, hitting the queen, obviously pressure on b7 as well. Black would have to drop back to c8. Very, very awkward situation here, and yeah, rightly so. This is much better for white. So a missed opportunity there by my opponent. He goes queen d2, I drop back the knight. He looks to reroute his knight, looking to reinforce his grip there on c5. My knight looking to jump into some of these juicy light squares myself, but what was even stronger was a prophylaxis approach, playing b6 to take away that opportunity for white to infiltrate. So missing that chance, I allow white to sink his knight into my position. I'm forced back to c8. And knight c4. So this was my idea here. This was why I wasn't really scared about letting him infiltrate into c5 and having my queen drop back onto this seemingly awkward file lined up against the enemy rook. Because my idea was that on the next move, pretty much regardless of what white does, I can intercept, and that pressure of lining up the rook against my queen doesn't really amount to anything because the knight interposes. So that was my idea. He moves to e2, so now there is a huge amount of pressure. And during the game, the obvious question for me to ask myself was, do I defend this pawn with something like knight g5 or dropping the knight back here to d8? But if we look at knight g5, for example, what I was worried about was something like, h4, simply kicking the knight back, and then we lose the pawn anyway. So I didn't feel that that was a strong continuation. But knight d8, for example, let's see what happens here. I think without that knight interposed on the c file blocking things up, really he can probably just start taking pawns, opening up the rook against the queen. So I think in that situation, white simply wins a pawn. So that didn't look the greatest to me. So my idea was to jump into c4 immediately and block up those chances. Yes, I do lose this pawn, but we can see that the alternatives weren't that great for me. So he took that pawn immediately, which is given as a mistake from the engine. Apparently just getting his second knight into the game was a stronger approach. So he drives straight in and we oppose our rook against this queen. So my idea was that it wasn't the end of the world to lose this pawn, because this pressure here would mean that I'd likely get some sort of counterplay and activity with my pieces. f4, bishop d6, so it's given as an exclamation mark. I'm not sure what is so brilliant about this move. We needed to vacate the e-file to get activity for the rook. We are hitting a pawn as well. And when white pushes forward with f5, we have a bishop on a absolutely monstrous diagonal. So yeah, I'll take the exclamation mark, but I think that was a pretty obvious move to play. White reinforces his knight. We jump into g5. Lots of pressure now on this knight on e6. He moves to g2, which is given as a big mistake. So apparently in this position here, black is with a crushing advantage actually. The engine is giving it as 3.3 in black's favor when white actually has an extra pawn. So during the game, I thought that, okay, I was doing well here, probably equal, dynamically equal position, chances for both sides. I didn't quite realize just how strong my position was, to be honest. But if we try to dissect things, at this stage. So in this position, apparently rook takes e6 was completely crushing for black, and I still don't see exactly what the idea is. So we've sacrificed the exchange. We get a knight and a pawn in exchange for that. We have removed white's most advanced and dangerous piece. So it looks dynamically equal to me at first sight, but apparently black is completely winning here. So the idea for black is, let's say for example the king just gets out of the way, we take the bishop on b2 and we infiltrate with the queen. So we are hitting this, the queen is tied down to defending the rook is tied down to defending the knight, so it's really difficult to find a move here for white. The engine gives h4 as a good try, and now we simply bring the knight in and it's looking really deadly. It gives queen c2 as the best try, and now simply knight to f2, king here, queen comes here with the aid of the bishop, and if he tries to run, we can simply go here and we're threatening to win the queen. So let's say he gives a check, we step up. What happens here? We simply get out of dodge, there are no more checks, and we are threatening checkmate. So really an incredible sequence here, starting with rook to e6. So yeah, something to have a bit more of a deep dive on later on in my analysis time, actually. Okay, so I did not see that during the game. I recaptured with the knight, which seemed quite natural to me. And this position here was a bit tricky to analyze, right? Because we have a lot of things happening, right? We've got pressure here. We've got a double attack from the rook and the queen against the knight, which is only defended once. And there are ideas of, for example, removing the guard this way. So currently this knight is protecting the bishop. If we remove that, we can snag that bishop. So there are a lot of things happening. This guy hanging, pressure here. And what I felt was that really this big threat here was the one that I needed to do something about. So we played b5, simply making sure that that knight is nice and stable there. And the idea now is that if he tries that approach, that we simply take back with the queen. And if he tries to pick up the bishop, then we have this absolutely ridiculous knight to g5, opening up the rook over here. So lots and lots of tactical ideas in that position. I'm not going to pretend that I saw absolutely everything during the game, but there was a bit of an intuitive feel that somehow things would work out for me with all this pressure. So he jumps into d3, looking to activate his knight. It's given as a miss. I play queen to d8, so that was given as an exclamation mark by the engine, but just looking at the engine lines back in this position, it's looking like a lot of different ideas for black are winning at this stage. So I play queen to d8. It's a very crude and caveman idea. I'm simply lining up the queen with a very nasty threat of giving a check and picking up Her Majesty. So he avoids that by stepping his king onto a light square, but in doing so he opened himself up into something just as nasty. And in this position, my opponent resigned. So very interesting game there. It turned out to be extremely tactical, not something that a lot of people would associate with the French defense, but these advanced French lines, they can be extremely interesting, especially in blitz games. You can get a lot of really crazy tactical ideas happening. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that game.